the fact is that this isn't actually about Andrew anymore. This is now about what the king knew and when he knew it. And that is the question that destroyed Nixon.
On February 19th, 2026, on his 66th birthday, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was arrested by British police.
The disgraced former Duke was arrested while detectives searched his new home at Sandringham and his old residence near Windsor Castle.
His position and power have offered him no protection from investigation that's been triggered by links to pedophile friend Giuffre Epstein.
The first senior member of the British royal family to be arrested in almost 400 years. Handcuffed, taken into custody, held for 11 hours in a police cell. But here's what nobody's talking about. This isn't about Andrew anymore. This is about what King Charles knew, and when he knew it. And if you know your history, you know that's the exact question that brought down Richard Nixon. What did the president know, and when did he know it? That question ended a presidency. That question destroyed the most powerful man in America. And right now, that same question is circling Buckingham Palace like a vulture waiting for something to die. Because here's the thing that's going to blow this whole story wide open. Charles didn't just know about Andrew's activities. Charles allegedly paid £1.5 million of his own money to make Virginia Giuffre go away. Charles oversaw a settlement of over £12 million to buy silence. Charles protected his brother for decades while knowing exactly what Andrew had done. The cover-up is worse than the crime. That's the lesson of Watergate. And we're watching it play out in real time with the British monarchy. I've been covering this story, and what I'm about to tell you is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about the royal family, about justice in Britain, about whether anyone is truly held accountable when they have enough money and power. Because let me be crystal clear about something. Andrew's arrest yesterday wasn't about justice. It was about damage control. It was about a system desperately trying to save itself by throwing one person under the bus while protecting everyone else who knew, everyone else who covered it up, everyone else who enabled decades of abuse. Stay with me, because what I'm going to lay out for you is why King Charles III might not survive this scandal, why we could be looking at the first abdication crisis since 1936, and why, for once, the British establishment might actually be forced to face consequences for protecting predators. Let's get into it. So let's talk about what actually happened yesterday, because the details matter here. Thames Valley Police showed up at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate at approximately 9:30 in the morning. This is where Andrew has been living since Charles forced him out of Royal Lodge in Windsor just 2 weeks ago. Forced him out in the dead of night, by the way. That's how desperate they were to create distance. Officers arrested Andrew on suspicion of misconduct in public office, not on sex trafficking charges, not on the allegations that have been swirling for years about Virginia Giuffre, on misconduct in public office. And that charge, it carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment in the United Kingdom. Let that sink in for a second. Life imprisonment. Now, the arrest stems from emails revealed in the Epstein files that were released by the U.S. Department of Justice. These emails show that in 2010, when Andrew was serving as Britain's special trade envoy, he was forwarding confidential government documents to Jeffrey Epstein. Reports about official visits to Hong Kong, Vietnam, and Singapore. Trade secrets, investment opportunities, information that should have been protected under official secrets laws. One email shows Andrew forwarding a confidential report to Epstein just 5 minutes after receiving it himself. 5 minutes. He didn't even wait an hour. He got classified information and immediately sent it to a convicted sex offender. Andrew was held in custody for 11 hours. They searched his home at Wood Farm. They searched Royal Lodge in Windsor. And when he was finally released last night, slouched in the back of an unmarked vehicle, looking absolutely defeated, he was released under investigation. That's police speak for, we haven't charged you yet, but we're building a case. But here's what's really significant. Within hours of Andrew's arrest, King Charles released a statement. And this wasn't your typical Buckingham Palace press release issued by a spokesperson. Charles signed it himself. Charles R., his personal signature. and he addressed it directly to the British people. I have learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. What now follows is the full, fair, and proper process by which this issue is investigated in the appropriate manner and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I have said before, they have our full and wholehearted support and cooperation. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. That's Charles trying to get ahead of this. That's Charles trying to signal to the British public that he supports justice, that he wants accountability, that he's not going to protect his brother. But here's the problem. It's too late for that, because we know Charles has been protecting Andrew for decades. We know about the money, we know about the cover-ups, we know about the settlements. And Charles's sudden conversion to the cause of open justice rings hollow when you understand just how deep his involvement in the cover-up actually goes. Let's talk about money, because money is where this whole thing falls apart for Charles. In February 2022, just months before Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with Virginia Giuffre, the woman who had accused him of sexually assaulting her when she was 17 years old. The woman who had been sex trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. The settlement was reportedly £12 million. That's roughly $14 million US, an enormous sum of money paid to make Virginia Giuffre go away, to buy her silence, to prevent a trial that would have put Andrew on the witness stand under oath in a U.S. court. Now here's where it gets interesting. On February 12th, just 1 week before Andrew's arrest, the Sun newspaper ran a front-page story claiming that King Charles had personally contributed £1.5 million of his own money toward that settlement. £1.5 million. From Charles's personal funds, Charles paid £1.5 million to help buy Virginia Giuffre's silence. Now let's think about what that means. Charles didn't just know about the settlement. He didn't just approve of the settlement. He actively participated in it. He used his personal wealth to make a sex trafficking victim go away. And here's where the timeline becomes absolutely crucial. That settlement was reached in February 2022. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee was in June 2022. And we now know from multiple sources that by that time, Queen Elizabeth was extremely frail. She could barely see, she could barely hear, she was confused. She was spending most of her time in bed. The idea that Queen Elizabeth was making decisions about Andrew's settlement at that time is frankly absurd. She wasn't capable of it. Multiple people who spent time with her in those final months have confirmed this. So who was really in charge? Who was really making the decisions? Who was really orchestrating the cover-up? Charles. It was Charles. Charles didn't want the Queen's Jubilee overshadowed by an Andrew scandal. Charles didn't want his moment to become king tainted by his brother's crimes. And there was something else Charles wanted, something that had been denied to him for decades. He wanted Camilla to be queen. For years, the official position was that Camilla would be princess consort when Charles became king. It was a compromise because of the public's lingering anger about Diana. But Charles never accepted that. He always wanted Camilla to be Queen Camilla, sitting next to him on the throne with a crown on her head. And in February 2022, right around the time of Andrew's settlement, Queen Elizabeth announced that it was her wish for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort. This paved the way for Camilla to become full queen when Charles ascended to the throne. Interesting timing, isn't it? Charles gets what he's always wanted for Camilla. Andrew's scandal gets buried with a massive cash settlement. The Queen's Jubilee proceeds without controversy, and everyone keeps their mouths shut about what really happened. That's not justice. That's a cover-up. And Charles was at the center of it. Now let's talk about something that hasn't gotten enough attention in all of this: the protection officers. When Andrew traveled, he had Metropolitan Police protection officers with him at all times. These were highly trained police officers whose job was to keep him safe. But they weren't just bodyguards, they were police officers, sworn officers with a legal duty to report crimes. And these officers saw things, they witnessed things. They stayed in Jeffrey Epstein's mansion in New York with Andrew for 10 days in 2010. This was after Epstein had already been convicted of soliciting a minor for prostitution, after he was a registered sex offender. Di Davies, the former head of Royal Protection, has spoken extensively about this, and he's been incredibly clear. Those protection officers had to have known what was going on. They stayed in what he describes as a brothel with young ladies coming in and out. There were lewd pictures. There were paintings of naked women. The whole place screamed that something illegal was happening. Di Davies says you would have to be blind, deaf, and stupid not to realize you were dealing with a sex offender. These weren't naive officers. These were experienced police professionals who understood exactly what they were looking at. So here's my question. Where are those officers now? Have they been interviewed? Have they given statements? Are they being asked to testify about what they saw? Because here's the thing. Those officers had a legal duty to report crimes, not a moral duty, a legal duty. If they witnessed criminal activity and didn't report it, they themselves could be prosecuted for misconduct in public office or for aiding and abetting crimes. Di Davies himself admits that if he were those officers, he'd be taking legal advice right now, because they're in a very difficult position. If they admit they saw crimes being committed, they have to answer for why they didn't report them at the time. But if they claim they didn't see anything, they're either lying or they were completely incompetent at their jobs. And it's not just the officers who went to New York. What about the officers who were with Andrew for years as he traveled the world as a trade envoy? What about the private secretaries? What about the government officials who accompanied him on these trips? How many people knew? How many people saw? How many people turned a blind eye because he was a prince and you don't question royalty? This is where the institutional cover-up becomes so obvious. Because it's not just one or two people protecting Andrew. It's an entire system. It's police officers who didn't report crimes. It's government ministers who ignored warning signs. It's palace officials who smoothed things over and kept secrets. Di Davies has alleged that government ministers knew about Andrew's behavior, that this information has been swilling around in the palace and in government circles for years, that multiple people in positions of authority knew the truth and chose to do nothing. That's the real scandal here. Not that one prince was corrupt and abusive, but that an entire establishment knew about it and protected him anyway. Think about the timing. The Epstein files have been public for weeks now. The evidence of Andrew forwarding classified information to Epstein has been known for weeks. So why did police wait until yesterday to arrest him? Why did they wait until his 66th birthday to show up with handcuffs? Because the story was getting too big to ignore. Because public pressure was mounting. Because people were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why Andrew wasn't being investigated. And here's what really tells you this is performative. Andrew Loney has been trying to get police to investigate Andrew for years. Years. He's filed complaints. He's submitted evidence. He's been blocked by Freedom of Information requests. He's found institutions to be anything but transparent. The police didn't suddenly discover evidence yesterday. They've had access to this information for a long time. They chose not to act. And they only acted now because the alternative, doing nothing, became politically impossible. And let's talk about two-tier justice, because that's exactly what we're seeing here. If you or I had forwarded classified government documents to a convicted sex offender, we'd have been arrested immediately. We'd have been charged. We'd probably be in prison right now. But Andrew, he gets to live on a royal estate. He gets to have the best lawyers money can buy. He gets released under investigation after 11 hours, while police carefully build a case that will take months or years to prosecute. Even if Andrew is eventually charged and convicted, he won't experience the justice system the way ordinary people do. He'll have teams of lawyers working around the clock on his case. That's millions of pounds in legal fees. Most people can't afford that. Most people get a court-appointed solicitor who's overworked and underpaid. Remember when Epstein was convicted in Florida in 2008? He got a sweetheart deal because he had Alan Dershowitz and a team of high-powered lawyers negotiating, on his behalf, 18 months in a private wing of the jail with work release privileges. That's what money and power buy you in the justice system. Andrew will get the same treatment. Maybe he'll be convicted. Maybe he'll even go to prison. But it won't be the same prison experience you or I would have. It'll be a cushy arrangement. He'll be the celebrity prisoner. He'll be protected. He'll be comfortable. That's not justice. That's just a different kind of privilege. And here's what really bothers me. The arrest is being praised as this great moment for British justice. Look, no one is above the law. Even royals can be arrested. But where were the police when Virginia Giuffre first made her allegations in 2015? Where were the police when she came forward again and again? Why was Andrew never arrested then? Why did it take 11 years and his brother becoming king and the Epstein files being released before anyone acted? The answer is simple. Powerful people protect powerful people, until the moment when protecting them becomes more dangerous than prosecuting them. Now let's apply that same framework to King Charles. The original crimes are Andrew's: the sharing of classified information with Epstein, the sexual assault allegations, the abuse of his position as trade envoy. Those are Andrew's crimes. But the cover-up? That's on Charles. Charles knew about Andrew's relationship with Epstein. He had to have known. They're brothers. They lived in the same circles. Charles's own protection officers would have briefed him about Andrew's activities. Charles knew about the allegations from Virginia Giuffre. He knew about the lawsuit. He knew about the settlement negotiations. And not only did Charles know, Charles actively participated in the cover-up. He allegedly paid £1.5 million toward the settlement. He oversaw the entire process. He made strategic decisions about timing it to protect the Queen's Jubilee and his own ascension to the throne. Charles used his position, his money, his influence to shield his brother from consequences. And then, when it became impossible to keep covering for Andrew, Charles forced him out of Royal Lodge and put physical distance between them. But here's the problem. You can't unring that bell. You can't participate in a cover-up for years and then suddenly claim you want justice when it becomes politically expedient. Charles's statement yesterday about supporting the law and wanting proper process rings completely hollow when you understand what he's been doing behind the scenes for decades. And if this goes to trial, if Andrew is actually prosecuted, what happens when his defense team calls Charles as a witness? What happens when Andrew's lawyers argue that he was acting with the full knowledge and approval of his family? What happens when they try to introduce evidence about the settlement and who paid for it? That's the nightmare scenario for Buckingham Palace. Because a trial doesn't just put Andrew in the dock, it puts the entire royal family on trial. It exposes all the cover-ups, all the payments, all the people who knew and did nothing. And that's why I genuinely believe Charles's reign might not survive this. Because if the truth comes out, if it's proven that Charles knowingly participated in covering up his brother's crimes, the British public will demand accountability. So let's talk about what abdication would actually look like, because I think it's a real possibility. The British monarchy has a built-in escape hatch for situations like this. If a scandal becomes too big, if the damage is too severe, the reigning monarch can abdicate in favor of the next in line. We've seen it before. Edward VIII abdicated in 1936 rather than give up Wallis Simpson. Juan Carlos of Spain abdicated in 2014 when his scandals became too much for the Spanish monarchy to bear. It's the ultimate circuit breaker. Okay, we screwed up, but look, we're changing leadership. Fresh start. Move. Forward. For Charles, abdication would allow William to take over. And William is popular. William has managed to stay relatively scandal-free. William and Catherine are seen as the future of a modern, slimmed-down monarchy. If Charles abdicates, the narrative becomes, yes, there were problems with the older generation, but now we have young, fresh leadership that will do things differently. It's an attractive option from a PR standpoint. It draws a line between the past and the future. It lets the institution survive by sacrificing one individual. But here's what I want you to understand. Abdication shouldn't be enough. Because the problem isn't just Charles. The problem is the system that allowed all of this to happen. The problem is an institution that believes it's above the law, that believes it can pay off victims and make scandals disappear, that believes its members deserve special treatment because of their bloodline. William taking over doesn't fix any of that unless there are fundamental structural changes. And those changes need to include stripping Beatrice and Eugenie of their titles and removing them from the line of succession. They're adults who have benefited from their father's position while doing nothing to distance themselves from his crimes, stripping Harry and Meghan of their titles. I know that's controversial, but if we're doing a genuine house cleaning, it needs to include everyone who's using royal titles for personal gain while not actually working for the institution. Removing Archie and Lilibet from the line of succession. They're American citizens who don't live in the UK and whose parents have denounced the royal family. Why are they still in line for the throne? Implementing genuine transparency. Open the books, show where the money comes from and where it goes. No more secret settlements, no more payments from private funds to cover up scandals. That's what real reform looks like. But I'm skeptical that will happen. Because the monarchy's default position is always to protect itself, to minimize change, to weather the storm, and go back to business as usual. But here's why I think this time might actually be different. Why this scandal might actually force real change instead of just being another crisis that the royals survive. First, the evidence is overwhelming and public. The Epstein files are out there, millions of pages of documents, emails, photographs, testimony. You can't make that go away. You can't claim it's all lies when there are official government documents proving what Andrew did. Second, Virginia Giuffre is dead. That matters. Because alive, she could be attacked, discredited, dismissed as someone after money. But dead, she becomes a martyr. She becomes a symbol of how the system fails victims. You can't smear a dead woman the same way you can smear a living one. Third, the British public is done. I've been watching British social media, reading comments, seeing polls, and the overwhelming sentiment is fury. People are tired of being told that royals are above the law. They're tired of their tax money going to protect predators. They're tired of being lied to. Fourth, Andrew's arrest sets a precedent. You cannot unarrest a senior royal. It's happened now. The police took him into custody. That's a line that's been crossed. And once you've crossed that line with one royal, it becomes much harder to argue that others shouldn't face the same treatment. Fifth, there's international pressure. The U.S. Department of Justice released these files. American media is covering this extensively. This isn't just a British scandal anymore. It's a global story about abuse, trafficking, and institutional cover-ups. And sixth, Charles is sick. He has cancer. I'm not saying that to be cruel, but it's a factor. Charles doesn't have the energy or the stamina to fight a prolonged crisis while also dealing with a serious illness. If this scandal drags on for months or years, it will take a physical and mental toll that he may not be able to sustain. All of these factors combined create a perfect storm that makes this crisis fundamentally different from previous royal scandals. Let's zoom out for a minute and talk about what this really means, because this isn't just about one corrupt prince and one complicit king. This is about institutional failure on a massive scale. The police failed. They had multiple opportunities to investigate Andrew over the years and chose not to. They prioritized protecting a royal over protecting victims. The government failed. Ministers knew about Andrew's behavior and did nothing. They allowed him to continue serving as a trade envoy, even when there were red flags everywhere. The media failed. For years, British media was deferential to the royals, downplaying scandals, accepting palace narratives without question. It took American victims and American prosecutors to force the truth into the open. The palace failed. Not just Charles, but everyone who works in the royal household. Everyone who saw the warning signs and chose to stay silent because their careers depended on it. And the justice system failed, because we're seeing in real time how justice works differently for the wealthy and powerful. Andrew gets arrested, held for 11 hours, and released under investigation. An ordinary person in the same situation would be charged immediately and denied bail. This is what two-tier justice looks like. And it's not unique to Britain. We're seeing it in America, too. The Epstein files show connections to powerful Americans. Where are their arrests? Where are their investigations? The FBI has had these documents for years. Where are the prosecutions? Why are people still in their jobs, still in their positions of power, still walking around free? Shame isn't dead in the United Kingdom. That's what's happening with Andrew's arrest. Britain is showing that at some level there are still consequences for the powerful. It's imperfect. It's incomplete. It's probably too little too late. But it's something. America could learn from that, because right now in America, everyone connected to Epstein is just carrying on. No consequences, no accountability, nothing. At least Britain is trying. At least there's been an arrest. At least the conversation is happening about what the king knew and when he knew it. So let me bring this all together. Prince Andrew was arrested yesterday. That's historic. That's significant. That matters. But the bigger story is what happens next. Because if Andrew goes to trial and starts talking about what his family knew, if he tries to use the Paul Burrell defense and claims he told Charles everything, then we're looking at a constitutional crisis that makes the abdication of 1936 look like a minor hiccup. Charles's reign is hanging by a thread. His statement yesterday about supporting justice and letting the law take its course was an attempt to get ahead of this story. But you can't cover up for someone for decades and then suddenly claim you want accountability when it becomes politically necessary. The British public isn't stupid. They see what's happening. They understand that Charles paid money to silence a victim. They understand that the timing of the settlement was designed to protect the Queen's Jubilee and Charles's coronation. They understand that this is about preservation of power, not pursuit of justice. William needs to take control now, not tomorrow, not after Charles abdicates. Now. He needs to come out and say this is unacceptable, that there will be real reform, that people will be held accountable. He needs to strip Andrew of everything. All titles, all money, all protection. Make him a private citizen who faces justice like anyone else. He needs to strip Beatrice and Eugenie of their titles. They've done nothing to earn them except be born into the right family. And that family has been protecting a predator. He needs to announce an independent investigation into what Charles knew and when he knew it. Because if William has any hope of restoring trust in the monarchy, it has to start with transparency about the cover-up. And he needs to do all of this while his father is still king. Because waiting until after abdication looks like just another cover-up. I genuinely don't know if the British monarchy survives this. I think it might. Institutions have a way of surviving things that should kill them, but it won't be the same monarchy. It can't be, because the Watergate question has been asked. What did the king know and when did he know it? And we all know the answer. Charles knew everything. He knew for years, and he used his money and power to cover it up. That's why his reign won't survive this, not because of Andrew's crimes, but because of Charles's cover-up. The cover-up is always worse than the crime. That's what destroyed Nixon. And that's what's destroying the British monarchy right now. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button because this story is far from over. We're going to be covering every development as it happens. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Charles will abdicate? Do you think this is really about justice or just damage control? Let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next one.